The 27 Club is a name popularly given to 6 particular musicians who died at that age.
You've got Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, all died within under 3 years of each other. This gave rise to this mythology.
And then leap a couple of decades and Kurt Cobain. And finally, Amy Winehouse.
The industry is very ephemeral and exploits people's craving for stardom, and it picks you up and then moves on to the next thing.
By this 27, they've either made it or they're at that difficult stage of their careers where actually they may get dropped by the label.
If you haven't made it by 27, you're not going to make it.
Look at the whole of 20th century and 21st century music. There's actually 50 famous musicians who all died at age 27. And if you look at 26 and 28, then there's 100. And if you look at everyone who died in the field of popular music at the height of their fame, there's well over 1,000 who died before the age of 35.
I remember I was at awards dinner one night and this manager came up to me and he said, "That artist isn't in your control, it's in mine. I'm the one who gets him the drugs at 3 in the morning."
I mean, some drugs are very destructive. And the trouble is when you get strung out on drugs, you lose your reason, you lose your balance, you only hear what you want to hear.
This is the thing, musicians are so sensitive.
When you're on stage, you are inherently vulnerable, but I think it's mainly what people project onto you.
It becomes, in the end, the 3 Ds: drink, drugs, and depression.
And we now know that trauma can run through family trees. And if it's not addressed, it can repeat itself.
You know, if you're not reasonably very strong up here and you can take all this stuff, then you really should get out. You know, it's not the right business for fragile people.
When I was head of A&RCA, an artist came in, he was not in a very good state, he was gibbering, he wasn't well. We could clearly see there were some issues. He stood up and his heroin needle dropped on the floor.
Does this horrific thing really exist? Rock's answer to the Bermuda Triangle.
It's a willing collusion between the artist, the public, and the people making the money.
We lost so many important rock stars at such a young age. Why at this particular age? Sort of mythology. It's the Loch Ness Monster of rock and roll.
I managed to live beyond the 27 Club, but only just.
The music business in the 60s suddenly made a massive change and it became very introspective in a sense.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is London. Swinging London, it's been called.
People such as Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison started, in a sense, exploring their own subconscious. The music business became intellectualized in a way.
When I was a student at Oxford University, coming into London for Rolling Stone magazine, and in those days the music business was like a village. There were no social media, so you had to meet at receptions and concerts and launches and so forth. Everybody got to know each other.
You know, so it was the beginning of, of the consumer society. It was the beginning of young people looking like themselves rather than looking like their parents.
I'm told that to be in the height of trendy fashion these days, you've got to wear shoes like these.
Music was evolving to be an incredibly important cultural force.
What the post-war music collective was suddenly able to realise was that all this suffering that people went through in the privacy of their own miserable bedrooms could suddenly be joined up in the zeitgeist. So you can turn on a radio or you can buy an album or a single, and suddenly there's somebody in your room giving extraordinary expression to exactly what you've been suffering alone.
And I think this is a generation of people who were seriously indulgent. Never before in living memory had there been a generation whose main sort of purpose in life was indulging themselves.
I think the record companies were picking up on what was going on in the world, that they were smoking dope and it was then moving into acid. The relationship between the music and dope was explicit but implicit with drugs.
Of course, psychotropic drugs can put you into a change of state of altered consciousness, but we go in and out of different planes of consciousness all the time. Successful artists or really good artists are the ones who are able to identify those states and use them and get into them and create in that state, and then when they're in the fully conscious state, rationalize it into a piece of work that has both sides, both the wild, irrational bit that has come out of that deep state of consciousness and something that's got the craftsmanship.
If you look back to the previous era when people were excessive, jazz era, there was no money involved in jazz, so people didn't really care. There was a lot of money involved in rock and roll, and there was no precedent. So if people wanted to party all the time and take a lot of drugs and become addicts, obviously now people are far more careful and far more circumspect because we've had a 50 years history of rock and roll and also 50 years of rock and roll casualties.
This was coincident with the arrival of cocaine.
It happens frequently, and it happened again last night. A cocaine arrest, this one at Miami International Airport. A Canadian accused of trying to smuggle 3 pounds of cocaine into this country in 3 pairs of platform shoes.
If you've seen the film Blow with Johnny Depp, you know that the distribution routes of cocaine didn't reach the northeastern United States and Europe on a wide scale until the early 1970s, but when it did, it did.
Cocaine is such an insidious, pernicious drug because it's so instant. The transformation in your mood is so quick, and it gives you this illusion of unlimited energy.
I mean, some drugs are very destructive, and the trouble is when you get strung out on drugs, you lose your reason, you lose your balance. You only hear what you want to hear.
The relationship of the record companies to the artist was to become the artist's friend. And you did that by getting them what they wanted. So if they were drinking, you bought them drinks. If they were smoking dope, you bought them dope. And if they wanted heroin, you bought them heroin. If they wanted cocaine, you bought them cocaine.
They were earning tens of thousands a week. So your bank balance increases dramatically. And people thought that therefore their physical tolerance would increase correspondingly. It was obvious that everyone was doing enormous amounts of cocaine because, since it was new, nobody knew what the right serving was. They were just doing what they could afford, which was too much.
It was a very different ballgame, and you would have seen quite a lot of pretty abusive kind of manipulation of artists. And, you know, the coke culture was throughout our industry was driving an awful lot of that mania.
The most public case of personality warping due to cocaine use is David Bowie, who gave a fascist salute at Victoria Station. In retrospect, acknowledged that he had overdone it. But then again, what was overdoing it? You didn't know yet. You had to have the people who overdid it to know what overdoing it was.
screaming, frenzied teenage idolizers of pop stars without a sensible thought in their long-haired heads.
You know, when you're in this, you're wanting a lot out of life. You know, you want to be famous and rich and have all these people screaming at you, and you want all this stuff. Well, you can't be feeble-minded. That's the big thing you want from the world. Well, you got to earn it for a start. And you want a long career, you've got to keep on earning it.
Of course, the ephemeral nature of pop success is such that if you don't write the follow-up hits, then you very quickly start getting bad reviews, the audiences start staying away in droves, and then the validation that you've pinned on that success evaporates. I had a stock of soluble distalgesics in my cupboard with which a friend of mine had successfully killed himself a few years earlier. Just as my kind of escape strategy.
And you couple that with all the kind of craziness of the business, of the readily available drink, drugs, women, anything else they might want.
It's like, well, I'm having sex with lots of people and there are all these drugs, and isn't this kind of amazing? And I'm going to go on this journey now, and I'm going to take drugs for 18 months and have a fantastic time.
Is there a direct link between music and addiction? You know, actually what music offers all of us is a release from anxiety, from just being kind of trapped in your own head with your own thoughts, your own sort of cognitive distress. It's a release from that.
I think artists find it very hard to be, on one hand, on this intense high, often very late at night, and then having to go and sleep, and then how do they manage it without taking too much drink to dampen them down, or stimulants to keep them going? And it's dangerous, of course, when you start using too many drugs to try and control your daily living. It's okay to dabble a bit every now and then, but you know, if it becomes a habit, it starts to control your life. And the trouble is, you need to take more and more to get the same effect, and ultimately it gets destructive.
What are the things that define this phenomenon? And in fact, they're all things that these people have in common. So they've all had a dysfunctional childhood. They've all had some terrible thing happen to them very early on in their life that they haven't been helped to process. So they're all full of angst, and creativity is the outlet for that. They're generally highly intelligent people who've been misunderstood at a young age. They all have a rebellious nature. They've been outcast, they've been misplaced, they've been misguided. And ultimately, because they make a lot of money doing the thing that they try and use to heal themselves from that, they indulge in drink and drugs, and those are the things that kill them.
I think, you know, you'll often see in history great artists, I'm not saying myself, but have, you know, probably have had some traumas. My father died at 13, and when he passed away, you know, I think, you know, for me, a void needed to be filled. You know, I was a teenage kid growing up without a dad, and it's like I needed to create something.
I think I was 14 or 15, can't remember for sure, 14. It was there that it was suggested that I had Asperger's. So they put me on drugs. They put me on Nardil and Valium for a year or two to keep me calm. I used to get very agitated about things. Because of Asperger's, I have a ridiculous level of concentration and obsession. We get obsessive about things. And if you choose music as a career, then that's the thing you become obsessed about.
Brian? Brian, how long have you been with the Rolling Stones? Are you one of the original members?
Yes, one of the original members.
What were you doing before you joined?
Well, just sort of bumming around waiting for something to happen, really.
Brian Jones had a difficult start. He was 3 when his 18-month-old sister died. Cognitive function, of course, is developing through our whole childhoods. So even if we haven't got a sophisticated way of conceptualizing loss, we have it imprinted onto our being by the experience.
Every artist is fucked up in some way in their childhood. Often, what fucked them up in their childhood leads to their greatest piece of work.
These apparent hitchhikers, so blandly ignored, are 5 of the most famous young men in show business, the Rolling Stones. Some of these motorists will be kicking themselves when they learn they missed the chance of a lifetime of getting to know them.
Brian Jones was acting out a lot way before he met Mick and the rest of the Stones. He was taking drink and drugs. He'd had 3 children with 3 different women by the age of 19.
But the first child was when he's about 14 or 15. But it's almost like he's trying to create another family.
He dropped out, he went travelling, he became a busker. It wasn't until he came to London and met Alexis Corner that he began to become interested in the blues and started to immerse himself in that crowd of people.
Brian Jones was really a bad boy right from the start, so it's often said that Andrew Oldham invented the kind of bad boy mystique of the Stones. It wasn't, it was Brian Jones. He was the one, where Mick and Keith walked into Ealing Blues Club and saw him. It's like, this is the real deal. We want to be like this. He had the whole thing. He had it down because it was innate.
At the time, I was so madly in love with Brian that I didn't think of the consequences. In fact, to be quite honest, even when I was about 7 months pregnant, I wouldn't believe that I was pregnant.
I felt very sorry for Brian Jones. It appears that he was the intellectual in the band. He started the band.
He decided single-handedly that they would move from being a kind of blues plagiarist type of outfit to rock and roll individuals.
Brian meets Anita Pallenberg in Germany, I think. And they quickly become the golden couple of Europe. They're the most glamorous, the coolest looking, the best dressed rock and roll star that Britain has ever had. They're the archetypal rock and roll couple. When Keith Richards takes Anita Pallenberg from him in 1967, I think that must have been, that's like he's losing his sister again, isn't it? He's losing his mother again.
Extremely insecure, so there was this shell of bravado and strutting, and he fell in with the Stones, and very quickly it became clear that there was something about Mick that was more magnetic, that the spotlight was moving from him onto Mick. So I think that he became extremely jealous.
I said the joint was rocking, going round and round, reeling and rocking, while it creams and sound.
But then the manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, came along and said, right now, Keith and Mick, you've got to start writing songs because this is the way to make money. And Brian was sidelined a little bit.
Their journey through life and their journey through success creates different pressures. Sometimes the songwriters become incredibly wealthy, sometimes the other members of the artist don't. The splits on how that all works.
And he resented that deeply because he founded this band, this was his baby, and it was ripped away from underneath him.
Brian Jones, his death and the Brian Jones story is a tragedy, really, because he'd had his group taken away from him. And even though, in terms of the iconography of the group and the look of the group, he was still very important, he hadn't contributed musically for a very, very long time. And his death, I suppose there was a certain amount of inevitability about that.
Well, being a pop star is a very dangerous business. You are putting yourself out on a limb. You're actually unleashing a lot of psychic energy. And I think Brian Jones is a good example of that, because if we look at kind of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, they grew into their role. If you look at Keith early on, he's a bit of a geek, with his big ears. He's not really very cool. And over time, you see him actually become Brian Jones, because Brian Jones was the archetypal rebel, but he couldn't take that mask off at the end of the evening. And when he kind of came up with rejection, then he would just drug himself into oblivion. So he hadn't really worked out how to play those roles.
Some of those issues go back to family and childhood and the environment with which they grew up. And some of those issues also come from a kind of abusive relationship within an act, which is often never really talked about.
The future as a Rolling Stone is very uncertain. My ultimate aim in life was never to be a pop star. I enjoy it, with reservations, but I'm not really sort of satisfied.
He really began to alienate himself. So he would, for example, when they were on the road, he would travel separately from the others. He would stay in separate hotels. He wouldn't interact or socialise with the other guys. And he made it very difficult for himself.
Musicians and creative, they're creative souls. They're delicate. They don't necessarily have the ability to say or communicate exactly what they want to do and what they feel or what they say.
Brian had apparently become he'd apparently just become impossible to work with, they thought. I think it's probably more complex than that. They were probably making it, they would turn his, when they're in the studio, they'd kind of turn his instrument down or off almost, and he wouldn't be aware of it.
Bands are like gangs, and some gangs have dominant members, and artists and bands have dominant members within them, and that it does actually kind of come down sometimes to kind of bullying.
He obviously started drinking, taking a lot of drugs, got busted a couple of times. The Stones wanted to go on the road again in 1969 to America. Brian couldn't get a visa because he had a drugs conviction, by which time they were fed up with him anyway, so they ousted him.
And so after they recorded what became Beggar's Banquet, I think it's just becomes, the whole situation just becomes untenable. I was shocked when he left. I think all fans were shocked. Because when you thought of the Rolling Stones, you really didn't think of Mick Jagger, you certainly didn't think of Keith Richards. You thought of Brian Jones, he was the public personification.
When Mick developed his Mick Jagger persona in performance, it was based on mainly Brian Jones with a little bit of Keith Richards. But of course, Keith Richards, if you look over time, he's starting to wear Brian's clothes literally, not even metaphorically. He's wearing the same scarves, the same outfits and the hats. And it's kind of strange because he doesn't ever look very good doing it until Brian Jones is defeated and then dies. It almost was like they picked the best bits of Brian and then tapped into them.
So, he bought Cotswold Farm, which was the home of A.A. Milne, who wrote the wonderful Winnie the Pooh stories. And that says it all. This is a boy trying to reclaim his childhood.
About midnight, Jones went for a swim with his Swedish girlfriend, Anna Bolin, and another friend, Mr. Frank Thorogood. After a time, Mr. Thorogood and the girl went back to the house. When they returned, they saw Jones at the bottom of the pool.
Always surprised. She found him on the bottom of the swimming pool at around midnight. Presumably he'd gone missing, gone for a swim, and had conked out from drinking drugs, and they pulled him. He was still barely alive when they pulled him from the pool, but he died soon afterwards because she couldn't speak very good English. She couldn't get anyone to come and help, and by the time they got him to hospital, he was dead.
So Brian drowns, of course, in his swimming pool. This is supposed to be the start of his new existence. But within a week, the Rolling Stones are playing Hyde Park to at least 250,000 people.
And Mick Jagger got up and read some verses from Shelley's Adonis.
Peace, peace, he is not dead, he does not sleep. He has awakened from the dreams of life. It's we that are lost in stormy visions and keep with phantoms an unprofitable strife. And in a mad trance we strike with a spirit's knife.
So Mick was obviously casting himself as Brian Jones's big best friend, although he hadn't been there for him in life.
Mick Jagger is suddenly, clearly in charge of the Rolling Stones. In his Mr. Fish man's dress, he looks astonishing. And even though when they released the butterflies in tribute to Brian, half of him are dead because they've been kept in cardboard boxes. Even that kind of moment kind of works. With the Stones' Hyde Park concert, it's like death and rebirth. And the symbolism of the butterflies is very interesting.
Hendrix was a one-off. whereby he embraced the psychedelic generation of the 60s. He was an enigma in that sense.
When you realise how damaged Jimmy's upbringing was, how ghastly, it was ghastly beyond Dickensian proportions.
In the case with Hendrix, he, very young, and as you say, he was knocked around an awful lot.
The mother, who's like a baby having a baby, she's 17 when she has him, a party girl, so she's the archetype of the electric lady.
His mother had him while his father was fighting in World War II.
Then there's the succession. There's the third brother with serious birth deformities, and then the two sisters, one of whom is born blind, and another one who also has serious birth deformities. One assumes this is because of some kind of consumption by his mother during pregnancy. Then the mother disappears. He's having to look after the younger brother. That's where his drive came from, his creative drive came from.
It's fascinating to think of Jimmy going through this series of transitions from absolute chaos to the extreme opposite of the restrictions and the strictures of the military. And then from there into a swing band where there's this corporate body where you have to absolutely be listening very carefully to your fellow musicians and you have to give over to the power of the collective.
And I think Jimmy, contrary to the apparent craziness of his existence, I think there was a great discipline to his behind his hard work. And all these people working incredibly hard, and they're also all incredibly bright.
And from there, that wonderful experience of playing in sync with people, he suddenly takes off on his trip to England.
In a way, I do wonder maybe after an experience working in those really tough bands, if you make one mistake, you get your wages docked. This going off and playing on his own like this, he's just like a boy with a fast car, you know? He was just went crazy.
Well, he was having an affair with a girl called Linda Keith, who Keith Richards thinks is his girlfriend, and she's even lent him one of Keith's guitars. Chas Chandler brings him to England. I've seen him in the Café War in New York. And I mean, kind of the rest is sort of history. He did take off incredibly quickly. I was almost surprised at the way he took off so quickly, but he's obviously absolutely hit the zeitgeist.
He's establishing himself in London and discovers this whole other world where he can suddenly take all the brilliance of the musical discipline that he had in a swing band and find a new way of expressing it.
The way he looked, the way he played. I mean, he was, you know, the sort of avatar of kind of underground music, wasn't he? Really? I mean, that's he emerged absolutely at that point, the end of '66.
Hello and good afternoon everyone. Der Beat Club meldet sich heute aus London. Ich stehe hier direkt in der Water Street, mitten in Soho. Und dieser Eingang hier dürfte sicherlich vielen von euch sehr, sehr vertraut sein. Es ist der Top Teenage Club von London, der Marquis.
The artist who I grew up with was Hendrix, who had this phenomenal creativity and free-flowing musicality, who was supported by a few people, but he broke free from them and then went on auto-destruct very quickly before he went off the boil. I mean, his artistic flair was still there.
Tell me, Jimmy, do you smoke?
No.
But there was nothing ever conventional about this man. He played a guitar with his teeth. Played a guitar without touching the strings. This was a showman, a natural entertainer who wanted to do a little bit more than just go out there on stage and play music, which he did love, worshipped music, but he wanted to show off.
Jimmy, how much do you rely on gimmicks?
Gimmicks, there we go again. Gimmicks, man. I'm tired of people saying we rely on gimmicks. What is this? The world is nothing but a big gimmick, isn't it? Wars, napalm bombs and all that. People get burned up on TV and it's nothing but a big gimmick.
and the group that he assembles for Woodstock, I think his performance at Woodstock is fantastic.
It's gone down in history. It's legendary because he played the Star-Spangled Banner, and it was thought that perhaps this was his statement to the world how proud he was to be an American. In fact, he was castigating the American government for their part in Vietnam. He was saying to the whole world was watching, I loathe my country and I don't want us to occupy Vietnam anymore. I want an end to this suffering. It's a very important statement, and that has gone down in history, and that isn't ever going to go away. Perhaps for that sole reason, we remember Jimi Hendrix. Success will bring you the adoration, i.e. love, of many, many people, millions of people in the extreme cases. But the more you get that, and the more people adore you, the less likely you are to get the one person who loves you just for yourself.
He was a genuine musician. I think he really cared about playing. And he was a flamboyant player. And he just wanted to take guitar to such an extreme.
With Jimi Hendrix, you had a medium-term disintegration. You had this incredible genius artist who is surrounded by people who are abusing and now has the money where he can do it. And he just slid into it as far as I can see. Until what for anyone on normal wages would be abnormal becomes normal.
I thought when he was, I think it's 68, 69, when he's busted with heroin in his bag going into Canada, there were apparently, the world he was mixing in New York was very, very druggy. It was much more druggy than anything that he'd been mixing in London.
Jimmy had a girlfriend called Monica Dannemann. He was a German ice skater. She was an insomniac. She couldn't sleep. She was prescribed some very heavyweight sleeping pills. Jimmy got hold of these. He'd been on the booze. I couldn't read the label. It was in German. He didn't understand that you could only take half of one of these tablets, half of one. He took 9 this particular night.
The Jimi Hendrix experience is over. The acid rock musician died today in a London hospital, apparently from an overdose of drugs. During his short career, Hendrix flailed his electric guitar into some of the most unusual sounds of an unusual music.
I was horrified. I'd seen Jimi Hendrix play, you know, all of his stunts, the behind the head. He said, "Oh, I guess this is what you've come to see." Clearly a genius. Who knows what else he would have done? But his body was that of a human being.
Janis Joplin, this poor girl who'd come from a normal home and had gone to a normal school, was persecuted and tormented from the age of 5.
She grew up in the South, in Port Arthur in Texas, in the 40s, and it was a racist state, and I think she instinctively reacted against that. I think her parents had liberal views, and you know, it's quite likely the bullying of Janis came from her expressing these liberal views in this redneck culture in which she was existing.
She started using alcohol to self-medicate from her early teens. So before she became an artist, she was already using alcohol to try and self-soothe.
She was once voted ugliest man on the campus at her college.
I didn't go to the high school prom, and
Oh, you were asked, weren't you?
no, I wasn't. They didn't think, I don't think they wanted to take me.
Janis Joplin, I think, was a very tormented character. Her primal scream, I think, was a subject of What was she screaming about?
Use me now, please, please. Come down here and use me now.
I went to San Francisco in 1963.
And she goes, I think, almost immediately to City Lights Books, which was owned by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the great poet, and she kind of loves that existence.
And of course immersed herself in the drug culture. I started injecting heroin, took a lot of cocaine, other kind of psycho drugs, was in the music scene, started to get involved with musicians, performed at Monterey and Woodstock, terribly. Pete Townsend actually said after her performance at Woodstock, mind you, even Janis Joplin on a bad night is better than everybody else.
You know, it's just music. Music's supposed to be different than that.
I think when you look at someone like Janis Joplin, I've talked to people who worked with Janis and were close to Janis, and they all sort of say the same thing, which was, you know, we could see she was floundering, we could see she was in trouble, but we didn't have the vocabulary that we have now. You know, no one knew or talked about rehab or addiction. You looked at someone like that and just thought, why can't she drink a little less? You know, why does she have to drink a bottle of Jack Daniels? You know, why is she doing heroin? You know, I wish we could stop this.
When Janis signs her record contract, she is clearly already, you know, an alcoholic.
What is it you think young people are looking for today?
25 words or less. This for radio.
Sincerity and a good time.
Are they finding it?
I don't know about you, Daddy, but I'm fine. At least I'm having a good time.
Every pop star has an unexpected moment when they're alone. No matter what kind of entourage you have, suddenly you're in a bedroom on your own and you have a couple of hours to spend. What do you do?
If you inject heroin, the extraordinary transformation in your physiology is so dramatic that you're catapulted into a state where you momentarily are disconnected from your miserable emptiness inside.
I would have been very worried about what was going on. Anyone who's had a serious heroin addiction like that, you've got to stop it.
And towards the end, as you know, Janis took to drugs far too often and far too heavily. That is a story of tragedy repeated many times over with the 27 Club or whatever you wish to call these people.
Janis Joplin once said that she was a victim of her own insides, that there was too much feeling. And many artists, as anyone who thinks deeply about the artistic nature, have a layer of skin missing. They feel things more than other artists.
I was a painter and a sort of a recluse in high school. I've changed.
She tried to clean up, she moved back home, she started wearing a beehive and normal clothes and got engaged to some bloke, but in there she knew that this wasn't her, this wasn't Janis. Poor Janis. She got her act together, she was back recording, she was back in Hollywood. She'd checked into this motel, the Landmark. This motel was pretty near to the recording studios that she was booked into, where she was going to go in and rehearse and record and create a new album, and she had her head around it. And she decided, right, no, clean up, go and stay in a motel, stay away from these people, can't get the drugs out to me there, and I'm gonna make this album properly. Trouble was, the drugs always found Janis, and she overdosed on heroin in her hotel room.
We know that Jim Morrison was extremely rebellious against his very, very military authority. His father was an admiral and very, very strict with everything that went with that, and he found it extremely claustrophobic. Jim Morrison's parents were on record as having decided that when they brought up their children, they would not use corporal punishment, they would not hit their children. But what they did instead was a military dressing down, which involved the father standing one or more of the children in front of him and yelling at them until they were reduced to shame-ridden, quaking, crying wrecks, which is another form of violence.
Using a persona is a dangerous business if you can't control it. And of course, Jim Morrison was a prime example of, developing himself into this poet.
The significant thing for Jim Morrison seems to have been, I think at the age of 4 in New Mexico, I believe it is, they're driving somewhere with his parents and they come across an overturned truck, which contained a lot of, American Indians. And this is a vision that comes back to haunt Jim Morrison consistently, and it appears in some of his lyrics. America was absolutely riven in two by people in favor of the Vietnam War and by young people, essentially, who were appalled by the notion of it. And so the Doors, of course, personified and embodied that sense of protest, and it must have been very confusing for him that, at the time, the Doors are becoming actually the biggest group in the United States. His father is in charge of an aircraft carrier bombing North Vietnam. That would suggest conflict that is unavoidable.
If you've read his biography, you know that his behavior in parties or social situations was sometimes antisocial. And he had this knack for poetic metaphors and images, and sometimes they were expressed in a commercial form, others in an artistic form like horse latitudes. But the point is that one of the reasons he was popular was because he was antisocial. And he was antisocial because he was unhappy.
Jim Morrison goes to UCLA Film School, and while he's there, discovers LSD, and in fact the first Doors songs are written during that period. The Doors at first are very druggy.
When I was a teenager, everything that Jim Morrison did was amazing to me, and his sort of, nihilistic excesses. It's almost a sort of celebration of that unsustainable, thoroughly impractical way of living your life. And so I enjoy it in a way for different reasons to the reasons that I enjoyed it when I was a teenager.
And of course the women come flocking, so what do the boys do? They don't say no, do they? So tons and tons of girlfriends. At one point he had 20 paternity suits pending.
It kind of goes LSD, marijuana, booze, and then the booze is sort of topped up with heroin. The heroin starts, sort of late 60s. It's before he goes to Paris.
When he escaped to Paris for a while with his girlfriend Pamela,
he kind of flees really to Paris. But Paris is not a good place to go to if you're trying to overcome hard drug problems.
and they just got immersed in the whole drug scene in Paris.
As we learned from the film The French Connection, heroin was a big drug in France. And Paris was the sort of epicenter of the European heroin trade.
Jim Morrison was off the rails in Paris. He seemed intent on drinking himself to death. Quite quickly, actually. I think one of the extraordinary things about Morrison's very short career is how much he changed physically.
But you feel that might be deliberate as well, because maybe he wants to destroy that image of himself. But he's clearly in depression.
Because in 1966, 1967, it's no doubt that part of the Doors' huge appeal was the fact that he was extraordinarily good looking. Great mane of hair, very good looking man, and by all accounts, very charismatic. But by the time he died in 1971, he was obese, and seemed to enjoy that he could bounce around bars in Saint-Germain in Paris, literally drinking himself to death. And he died of a heroin overdose, which is accidental, no more complicated than that.
You've got Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison all died within under 3 years of each other. This gave rise to this mythology of the 27 Club, which might have gone away, and in fact did for a while, because it was quite a long time before it happened again. Almost 25 years later, Kurt Cobain.
He's a sort of archetypal child of his age. Parents are divorced. In fact, the parents of all the members of Nirvana were divorced.
He was ashamed of the fact that his parents had gone their separate ways. He was angry with them for leaving. His mother had custody for a while, but she couldn't cope with him. And she packed him off to live with a dad who couldn't cope with him, so he left him to be looked after by family members and friends. He started to rebel at school.
In Kurt Cobain's family, suicide was common.
Kurt Cobain, came from a family with a history of mental illness. 2 of his uncles had killed themselves by shooting themselves, and one of his great uncles had also shot himself. And we now know that trauma can run through family trees. And if it's not addressed, it can repeat itself generationally, intergenerationally.
He started drinking very heavily when he was 13. There was an old wino living in the village that they used to bribe this old guy to go in and buy drink for him.
When he's an early teenager, he comes across a boy in a forest hanging by the neck, but he would say, "Do I have the suicide gene?"
How would you define the music of Nirvana? With a twist of lemon.
Now, you've got a very handsome, very small, very frail little music fan, completely taken by punk rock and the Sex Pistols and the Beatles and the Monkees and a weird sort of array of musical influences.
I think that Nevermind is kind of a brilliant, and it's a rock album, but it's also a brilliant pop album. Those songs are just gorgeous. They are just perfect 3-minute kind of pop songs with a complete twist harmonically and with that rage and that kind of energy.
It's interesting that Kurt Cobain loved ABBA so much. They made these incredible songs that were so dense with melody, and they did them in the most boring way imaginable by just going to a small studio and just working sort of office hours, often very long office hours.
I think Kurt had been doing heroin for a long time. I think he'd been doing it before Nirvana was successful.
As I expected, before I started doing heroin, I realized that I knew at the beginning that it would become just as boring as marijuana does, like all drugs. After a few months, it's just as boring as, breathing air.
All artists have to, in order to sustain, they have to pass an initiative test. Kurt Cobain's challenge would have been to have just shifted from this kind of incredibly cathartic, raw music that he made.
Nirvana made Euphoric Misery and sang it to the world, and the world sang it back.
Kurt Cobain changed the way harmony worked for rock. Nobody else was doing those changes. Nobody was using those flat fives and those amazing sequences that were just so original. And somehow he had a melodic ability to make sense of really discordant sequences.
The material success that Nirvana enjoyed certainly allowed him to to destroy on a grand scale, both himself and in terms of cultural destruction. I interviewed him. I asked him, what are your hopes for the next decade? And he said, I want to debase every known form of popular music that ever existed.
I think he was very ambivalent about his status as it was, and the bigger he became, the more he tried to neutralize his guilt about being a kind of corporate rock star.
I think he was a very conflicted individual. He wanted it both ways. He wanted to be rich and famous. He wanted to be successful, but also he wanted it to appear like he hadn't had anything to do with it. He wanted to maintain the credibility within the artistic community from which he sprung.
Punk rock should mean freedom, liking and accepting anything that you like, playing whatever you want, as sloppy as you want, as long as it's good and it has passion.
In Utero, the final Nirvana album, which was produced by Steve Albini, and Steve Albini is very much the producer you go to if you want to kind of prove to the wider world that you're no longer a corporate whore.
He gets involved with Courtney Love. She's a very intelligent woman, but difficult with her own demons. But she's trying to get him to clean up.
So he really did set off on a path to be a decent parent, put himself into rehab, but couldn't stick to it.
He goes back to Seattle, the part where you go to get heroin and hookers, and Kurt really can't like this world.
Tonight, word of an untimely death. Kurt Cobain was the lead singer of the group Nirvana. Their albums were bestsellers, their songs filled with images of despair and violence. One lyric, "The sun is gone, but I have a light, the day is done, but I'm having fun." And then this morning, his body found at home, another casualty of success.
He couldn't handle it because he wasn't equipped to. He didn't have any infrastructure, there was no support system. His girlfriend was a wife, she was as addicted as he was. So there was nothing to cling to, there was no link for him, there was no yardstick to measure himself by.
It was obvious this man is dead from a shotgun wound to the head. Now, there was a suicide note left inside the house.
I was really shocked when I saw the front page of The Independent reporting the death of Kurt Cobain. Why was I shocked? Because it was on the front page. He'd only had one big hit. But he had become such a totemic person, such a symbol for his generation, that to these people, it didn't matter that he hadn't had more than one big album.
I had sort of admired him, and I really like Nirvana, and I think it's a real shame that he did it.
Everybody is real upset about it, and it's a shock. We can't understand, we can't believe that it happened. It's unbelievable.
Kurt Cobain actually invented a whole new style of guitar playing, in a sense. The guitar inversions on the chords are brilliant. And he was almost as influential as the Stones and Beatles in many ways.
I was quite amazed because I was used to people having an impact in their death who had had major catalogs, ranging from Bing Crosby to Elvis Presley. But no, this was the ultimate proof that in pop music we had now reached the stage where you could have one giant record and people take you as seriously as they would someone who has had 10 years of hits.
And his mother, Wendy, when he died, she gave an interview to a local paper and she said, "He's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club," which was taken to mean the 27 Club. But in fact, what she really meant was the uncles who'd committed suicide. So the press really got hold of this, and the whole myth of the 27 Club exploded all over again.
The person who a record company tried to save but failed was Amy Winehouse. Because you know that Lucian Grange spoke to her and sent her to the West Indies to get it together.
People were talking about Amy's problems, and I know the head of Island Records was thinking, we'll drop her just so she can sort herself out. But it's too much of her. I mean, back-to-back sold millions. Are you going to drop your major talent?
If you really sort of scratch the surface of the lip service given to, of course, we want to help our artists and we don't want them to be unhappy or drug addicted, you know, I think you do find that there is some investment in chaos. There is some investment in the car crash narrative.
Prescription drugs. No, what makes me crazy? Alcohol doesn't do nice things to me. I'm quite a horrible drunk. Quite a horrible drunk, actually.
She was fascinating because she was imploding.
When she stood on that stage with a microphone in front of 50,000 people at the Isle of Wight Festival, she was exposed, she was frail, and she was amazing because of all the different emotional contexts that happened to her experience. The pain that Amy was suffering, and whether it's the alcohol issues or the substance issues or the environmental issues, whatever her issues, specific issues were that day or as she was performing, that's what made her great.
Amy was the apple of her dad's eye. Her father, Mitch, the cab driver, the East London Jewish family, mother, a chemist.
Amy's angst obviously stems from when her mum and dad split up, because it was this happy little girl. She was just sitting there listening to her dad's records, and Dad would pick her up, and the grandma she was very close to. This lovely little Jewish sort of family going on, no cares in the world.
She adored her dad, but her dad was cheating on her mom. And so therefore it must be Amy's fault. She couldn't work out that this was for any other reason than that something she had done wrong.
There was no slow burner with Amy. She just sort of burst onto the scene.
Every so often somebody comes along like an Amy Winehouse, who is truly talented.
By the time it got to Back to Black in 2006, she'd found the voice. She was angry, she was reacting. She knew that she had to loathe her father for what he was doing to her mother. She's known throughout the world by this time for 20-odd songs.
And she obviously had an addictive personality. Starts off on drink, then goes to weed, then went on to coke.
She's in pain, she's hurt, comes out in all her songs, but she's part of her age and part of her culture. She kind of she really enjoys going out and getting off her head.
She tangled her hair up in this terrible, ugly beehive. She had herself tattooed. She was showing all the signs of self-harm. And what is self-harm but self-loathing?
The well-publicised problems around the tragic early death of Amy Winehouse has certainly, made everybody kind of sit up and think, okay, we really need to be doing more.
The extent to which she was in the public eye, I think, was quite unprecedented. We kind of forget now. So there's a certain amount of, you might think, is sort of death by, celebrity culture.
The thing that made Amy's life different was that she was doing all this in the information age. So every breath she took, every drug she overdosed on, every bottle of wine she consumed was splashed all over the front pages and on people's blogs. She never stood a chance.
I had some pretty horrific times when I first started with the press. I had a very bad relationship with the press for a very long time. And by having Asperger's, I often said the wrong things at the wrong time, and I couldn't understand them. And it was all a nightmare for quite a few years.
Because as soon as you're out there now. There's no hiding from it. You either are this person. There is no kind of mystique. There's a camera everywhere.
That Belgrade show was the one when the footage from that went viral. That's when people just thought, this is a car crash. So if you're her father or her mother, her so-called friends, would you have let your daughter walk out on that stage?
I have hosted the Ivor Novello Awards for 29 years. The saddest event in those 29 years was watching the deterioration of Amy Winehouse, who won 3 years in a row. In the first year, she goes up on stage and she's perky and young and oh, this is so exciting. And it's your typical what you want to see pop star reaction to being honored by her peers, her fellow writers. Second year, she gets up there, she's a little hazy. She's not all together, but yeah, she's still happy. Third year, her name is announced, and she's not there yet. Now this is a lunchtime awards ceremony. Her name would have been called at around 2:30, but she hadn't gotten it together yet.
She may not have been at the glitzy luncheon, but all talk was on Amy Winehouse, who's leading the pack with an impressive 3 nominations.
And I thought, man, if you're so messed up that you can't even get somewhere by 2:30, you're in deep trouble. And I thought, oh my God, you know, unless somebody stops this, it's over.
I don't know what I'm doing up here, you know, but Amy unfortunately couldn't make it, but she is getting better.
And she said to her dad, I need to get away from this. I want to go on holiday. Can we just go on holiday, just you and me, Dad? So he said, yeah, we'll go to the Caribbean. They booked a holiday, just the two of them. He brought a film crew, and she was horrified when they rocked up. He turned up with a film crew. And she said, well, what are they doing here? And he said, well, you know, I thought we might just do a sort of at home with Amy on holiday. She said, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to leave it all behind, and I just wanted to have some time with you. And even on holiday, that time, she never got.
I think when Amy had reached that sort of state where everyone could see how she was, it just took anyone just to step in.
She was let down by her family, by the people around her, possibly by the record company, and she didn't appear to be very good at making good choices, so I think she is the one who slipped through the net.
Amy was more than 5 times the legal drink drive limit when she died, as the coroner at the inquest into her death recorded a verdict of misadventure.
Yeah, I think her dad, I think Mitch Winehouse does have a part to play, because it was almost like he was looking to launch his career on the back of Amy, which he did.
Instead of looking at these pictures of his daughter, with the blood seeping through the ballet shoes and the self-harming going on, and thinking, Amy needs me, I owe her, I'm her father, I need to save her from this. What does he do? Launches a music career. Decides to fulfill his lifelong dream of being a quasi-Frank Sinatra.
She was supposed to have these minders that were to keep her away from it. But I said, but then she'd be alone in a room with a mobile phone.
She was in a weird kind of marriage, or wasn't it a marriage? Nobody really knows about that relationship.
What can we learn from the deterioration of Amy Winehouse? Well, one thing is, it's hard to stop somebody when they're on the way down, because you don't control their heart, their mind. Their emotions are their own.
Before her 28th birthday, she'd poisoned herself with alcohol, and she died.
Of her old friends and the record company was not enough to stop the deterioration of someone who suddenly could afford every vice.
Why weren't people looking after her? She had a minder. Why wasn't somebody watching what she was consuming?
No one is really looking after them. Why weren't people really keeping an eye on them? I mean, Amy, she's got the bodyguard outside her door, and she's inside dying.
I don't go along with a conspiracy theory, the industry, as if it were the gods of Valhalla sitting at a banquet table saying, okay, who down there is really messed up?
For me, I think I had pinned all my sense of self-worth on the idea of having some sort of success in music, that it would validate me as a person if a lot of people loved me.
When I was 21, I did nothing but get up in the morning, write songs, think about it, you know, go daydreaming, then go to sleep. That was it, that was my life.
And there's something really great about no one giving a shit, because you just create, you just make stuff and you just do what you just play like a child plays. You're not self-conscious at all. And then the bubble gets smaller and smaller as more people start having opinions around you, and so there's money in what you do. As soon as there's money in what you do, everyone's got an opinion.
When a human becomes a profit source, a cash cow, most of the people around him, except for a true friend, will cater to their every whim.
You know, drug abuse doesn't just stop at the artist. Sometimes it comes from the record label to the artist. I'd argue, quite honestly, that some of the people within the industry are suffering from some of the same effects.
Most artists, you've got to build a link with them first. You've got to build a bridge with them before you start telling people what to do. One of the things I sometimes do would be say, well, better that I prescribe for you than you go and buy bad stuff or illicitly on the internet. So the first thing you do is aim for stability whilst keeping my GMC license.
Obviously, as a manager, I sometimes have encouraged people to do what I thought would be best for their career. Was it because it's best for their career or because it's best for my wallet?
There's that line with commercialism, right? It's like, it's that line. And for me, there's a clear line.
What the industry defines success as, which is selling records, which we all would like, but you know, to maintain a level of kind of cultural relevance and be played on the radio and sell your records, ultimately is kind of unattainable, I think.
Fame is traumatic because everyone thinks they want it, and then when it comes knocking at the door, it's very difficult to handle.
Having seen what I've seen, I certainly wouldn't want to be a star. It's a very fragile, ephemeral existence. It may be fun for a while, but I think you very soon lose your soul.
It's not the job of the music industry to be a social worker, but as circumstances have it, the music industry is an enabler.
I think the record industry has a responsibility. I think, you know, certainly when you're working with young talent, we have a responsibility. Remember, as a record industry, we spend a lot of money. We invest a lot of money in these artists. You know, so if I'm going to invest £300 or £400 or £500,000, which can rise up to, you know, £1.5 million sometimes before we actually start bringing the money back, that's a big investment. So I want to know that the artist that we're investing that money into is solid.
You know, I've seen artists crying, you know, who've been dropped, just in a room on their own. And I walk past and what the fuck do I do? This is an artist. Nobody's comforting them. Nobody's doing that. And then that's how awful the world has now become.
You know, if you are going to take their money, they're not going to give it for free. They're not a charity. They are going to want something back from you.
There are fewer artists, and there are fewer artists that make a lot of money. And in my way of thinking, the sort of narrative arc of the rock and roll era is sort of coming to an end, really.
The days of record labels finding unknown artists and completely moulding them and doing it that way are over.
Of course nobody wants to cause harm. It's not a deliberate thing at all, but they're like raw materials and assets for these companies.
I think you can reasonably in business expect them to have a fiduciary duty. I don't think you can reasonably expect them to have a moral duty.
I think most artists have, generally speaking, something missing.
The industry knows that the way to keep them going is you give them what they want.